Why does a loving God allow pain and suffering? This question has haunted humanity for centuries, lingering in the minds of both believers and skeptics alike. It is not just a theoretical or philosophical dilemma, but a deeply personal and emotional one. When tragedy strikes, when a loved one is lost, when disaster befalls an innocent, when illness or heartbreak shatters a life, we instinctively cry out, "Why, God? Why would you let this happen?" For many, this question becomes the greatest obstacle to faith. Some walk away from belief altogether, concluding that a good God and a world of suffering cannot coexist. Others struggle in silence, fearing that even to question God is an act of doubt, or worse, betrayal. Yet we find that some of the greatest Christian thinkers, including C.S. Lewis, wrestled deeply with this very question. In his book, The Problem of Pain, Lewis takes us on a journey through suffering, seeking to understand why a loving and omnipotent God allows pain to exist in the world he created. But Lewis doesn't stop at philosophy. He invites us into the heart of the matter, revealing profound truths that may just change the way we see suffering forever. So, in today's discussion, we will explore this question through the wisdom of C.S. Lewis. We will examine his insights into the nature of pain, its purpose, and ultimately, what it reveals about the character of God. If you have ever wrestled with suffering, if you have ever asked, "Why, Lord?" then this journey is for you. Why does suffering exist? A challenge to faith. At first glance, the problem of pain seems to present an undeniable contradiction. Christianity claims that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good. If this is true, then wouldn't he prevent suffering? After all, if he is omnipotent, he has the ability to stop it. If he is omniscient, he knows every pain we experience. And if he is good, shouldn't he want to put an end to all suffering? Atheists and skeptics argue that suffering is proof that either God does not exist, or if he does, he is not entirely good or powerful. Philosopher David Hume famously put it this way: "Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is impotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil?" This is the dilemma that Lewis himself faced. Before his conversion to Christianity, Lewis was an atheist, largely because he believed that the cruelty and pain of the world were incompatible with a loving God. However, he later realized that the problem of suffering is not as simple as it seems. In fact, he came to see that suffering, far from disproving God, actually points toward him. How? Let's explore. Suffering and the reality of free will. Lewis argues that much of the suffering in the world is a byproduct of free will. God created humans with the ability to choose, both good and evil. This freedom is essential, for without it, love itself would be impossible. Imagine a world where humans had no ability to choose wrong. If we were simply programmed to always do good, we would be like robots, incapable of true love, true sacrifice, or true moral growth. Love must be freely given, and for that to happen, we must be capable of choosing not to love. Lewis writes in The Problem of Pain, "Try to exclude the possibility of suffering which the order of nature and the existence of free wills involve, and you find that you have excluded life itself." In other words, a world without the possibility of suffering would also be a world without true humanity. It would be a world devoid of moral depth, where no real virtue could exist, because no real choices could be made. But even if we accept that free will makes suffering possible, why does God allow it to continue? Why doesn't he step in when the pain is too great? The purpose of pain. God's megaphone. One of Lewis's most famous insights into suffering is this: God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Lewis suggests that pain is often the tool God uses to wake us up. When life is comfortable, we tend to forget him. We become self-sufficient, absorbed in our own desires, and blind to our need for God. But suffering has a way of breaking through our illusions. It strips away our pride, our distractions, and our false sense of control. Consider how often people turn to God in times of crisis. A soldier in the trenches, an atheist on their deathbed, a grieving mother. Suffering has a way of drawing us toward God in ways that comfort never could. This does not mean that suffering is good in itself, but that God can use it for good. Does this mean that all suffering is just a test? Is pain something we should simply accept and move on? Lewis goes deeper. The mystery of suffering. Not an easy answer. Lewis does not offer simple answers because he knows that suffering is not just a theoretical issue. It is a personal one. When we are in pain, philosophical explanations often feel cold and distant. This is why Lewis himself struggled deeply with suffering when his wife, Joy, died of cancer. In his book, A Grief Observed, written after her death, he confesses his raw and unfiltered anguish. Where is God? Go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain, and what do you find? A door slammed in your face. Here we see Lewis not as a detached philosopher, but as a man wrestling with the weight of suffering just as we do. And yet, even through this darkness, he came to a profound realization. God is not absent from our suffering. Rather, he suffers with us. The cross, God's answer to suffering. Christianity does not offer a God who is distant and untouched by suffering. Instead, it presents a God who enters into suffering, who took on flesh, walked among us, and ultimately bore the weight of pain and death on the cross. Lewis reminds us that the cross is God's ultimate response to suffering. He does not merely watch from afar. He joins us in our pain. We do not have a God who sits safely in heaven, unmoved by human agony. We have a God who has lived it, suffered it, and conquered it. In Christ, we see that suffering is not meaningless. It has a purpose. It can be redeemed. The cross tells us that even the worst pain can lead to the greatest good. Conclusion: a different perspective on pain. So, why does God allow suffering? While we may never fully grasp all the reasons, Lewis gives us glimpses of the truth. Suffering exists because of free will, and free will is necessary for love. Pain can serve as God's megaphone, drawing us closer to him. God does not remove suffering, but he redeems it through the cross. In the end, Lewis does not claim to have all the answers, but he points us toward hope. Suffering is not the end of the story, and one day, as Revelation 21:4 tells us, God will wipe away every tear from our eyes. If you found this discussion helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever wrestled with the problem of pain? Let's continue this conversation together. Until next time, remember, even in suffering, God is near.